I'm going to call the November 4th, 2020 Legislative Committee meeting to order. My name is Augie Beltran. I'm the committee chair. At this time, I'd like to welcome our new board members, Rodney, Cobos, and Miguel Galarza. Welcome to the board. And also at this time, I'd like to thank you, Rick. You've been of great help to me and the rest of the board. I remember meeting you the very first time 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago when I was first appointed. And I really thank you for all you've done and all the help and support you've given myself. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please note that only board members who are members of the legislative committee may participate in the committee meeting. Other board members who are in attendance may observe but cannot ask questions or participate in the discussion. Committee members, when you'd like to comment at any time throughout the meeting, either select the raise your hand icon on the WebEx. I'm in because I'm not really good at this WebEx type stuff. When called upon, please unmute yourself, and when finished, return to mute. You will also need to click the raise your hand icon to lower your hand. We'll now introduce committee members and staff. Joining us today is Registrar David Fote, Chief Deputy Registrar Tanya, CSLB staff, and our board legal. Go ahead and do a roll call for us.
Augie Beltran.
Here.
Altamura.
Here.
Rodney Cobos.
Here.
Miguel Galarza.
Here.
Susan Granzella.
Here.
Jim Ruane.
Here.
Mary Teichert.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We start with B, public comment session for items not on the agenda and future agenda item requests. This item is provided for public comment pertaining to items on the agenda. Should say items not on the agenda. Please remember the committee cannot discuss or take action on any items not listed on the agenda. The CSLB welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda. It is CSLB's intent to ask for public comment prior to the committee taking action on any agenda item. But if for some reason we forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item, a member of the public desiring to comment on the item should raise their hand and they will be recognized. If your comments do not involve an item on today's committee agenda, this item will be the time to, time to make those comments. Also, to allow this committee sufficient time to conduct its scheduled business, we will be limiting public comment to 3 minutes per individual. Members of the public, if you joined us on WebEx and would like to make a comment at this time, either raise your hand or use the chat feature to send us a note that you would like to offer public comment. If you joined us by phone and would like to make a public comment, please press *3 to raise your hand. We will use the same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. Rick, at this time, are there any members of the public who'd like to make a request?
No public comment at this time.
Anyone from the committee? Would anyone from the committee like to say something? I don't see any hands. You got anything there, Rick? Okay.
No comments, no hands.
And we're now on C, update on the 2019-2020 enacted legislation. We're now on page 219 of your packets. This section is an update on legislative bills on which the CSLB took a formal position for the 2019-2020 legislative session. The board last voted on these bills at its June 5th, 2020 meeting. Chief Jay, give us an update.
Good morning / afternoon all. For the new members, my name is Mike Jamnetsky and I am the Chief of Legislation for the Contractors Board. We are very happy to have you on board. So these measures, as the chair stated, the board has already, these have been enacted. The CSLB had a very successful legislative session with regard to the measures that the board supported and sponsored, especially in light of the COVID situation. So for our new members, I'm just going to give a brief background on those measures that we were successful with this year. On page 219, AB 2210, this actually goes back to April of 2018 when the board directed CSLB staff to work with DOSH to address and attempt to resolve some of this safety concerns that were raised by the tree service industry. So this concept is a couple years old, and this bill was identified as an effective way for CSLB to get right to OSHA violations through its disciplinary authority. It also provides some additional time for CSLB to prosecute those violations because the existing statute did not provide a significant time frame for doing that. So this bill was successful this year. The CSLB now has authority to take disciplinary action against a tree service contractor for explicit violations of the safety rules of OSHA as it relates to tree service, providing safety, best materials, that sort of thing. AB 2232, renewal of licenses. This was actually sponsored by the Associated General Contractors, but CSLB did come out in support of it. That measure itself, 2232, was tabled because of COVID, but its content was put into SB 1474, which is later in your packet. So that measure was also successful. And what this does really is CSLB already had authority to grant a retroactive renewal of a contractor's license. So within, if a renewal for a license comes within 90 days, it comes to the board within 90 days of the expiration date of the license. Existing law authorized the board to retroactively reinstate that license back to the renewal date. But it had a weird provision in there, and the provision was only if the contractor could identify circumstances out of their control were the reason for them renewing late. This proved tough for our line staff to assign any meaning to and implement. So what this bill really did was eliminate this section, the subjective standard of whether a contractor renewed for reasons out of their control, and just allow the registrar to retroactively reinstate a renewal when the renewal comes in a couple of days late. So that measure was successful as well. AB 2471, the CSLB did not sponsor this, but we did support it. And this provides an extended right to counsel a home solicitation services contract from 3 days to 5 days for senior citizens, those who are over 65 years old. AB 3087, we've touched on this earlier today. The board will save a lot of money by joining a master contract that's already in place with DCA that administers license exams for various agencies. Right now, CSLB administers its own exams, and that involves test centers and staff and time. This measure allows CSLB to outsource or contract out for the administration of its exams. CSLB will continue to develop its own exams in-house. SB 1189, we've touched on that earlier as well. This is a successful measure for CSLB because it creates the new remodeling contractor's license. That actually goes back to 2015 before this board. At the end of 2015, the board staff did get authority to come up with a regulation for this remodeling contractor's license, and it just didn't move forward. But this measure has been in the works for a long time, and we are pretty thrilled that we now have a residential remodeling contractor's license. This SB 1189 also does some other make some other changes that were propelled by the author, not specifically by CSLB, that relate to disaster and home improvement, and particularly penalties for contracting in a disaster zone. So if you have any questions about those, feel free to contact me. And then 1474 is an omnibus bill. The changes that occurred are on your packet. They're technical and non-substantive, but I can answer any questions about those. But that is our update on our successful legislative year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Rick, is there any public comment on this?
No comment on this item.
Any board comment? I don't see any hands. Okay. Now that brings us to agenda item letter D, update on previously approved legislative proposals. Now we're on page 223 of your packet. This agenda item includes a summary and status update of legislative proposals approved by the board at the December 2019 and September 2020 meetings, for which staff will seek an author for in 2021. Chief, what do you got?
Yes, this is our primarily an update on what the CSLB Legislative Division will be looking for authors for this year. There are 3 proposals here that have all been approved by the board, as the chair stated, and this does not include the measure that would include our fee increase, which we discussed briefly this morning in the executive committee, whether that would be a budget trailer bill or a policy bill. If the fee study goes to the board in December and the board authorizes CSLB to pursue legislation to increase fees by statute, that would be a 4th proposal. So there's 3 on this page and 1 more potentially for a total of 4 that CSLB would be seeking authorship for the 2021 session. But for a quick background, as mentioned, the 3 on this page, these have already been approved by the board. The increased civil penalties for specified violations of the contractors law. The real quick and dirty here is the $15,000 cap for civil penalties. That's 27 years old. It hasn't been raised in 27 years, and the CPI index puts this closer to 30 grand. This would allow CSLB to recover some much needed revenue from enforcement penalties from an old statutory max. Same with the $5,000 max. That's 20 years old, or almost 20 years old, 2003. The CPI would, CPI is the consumer price index, would raise that to approximately $8,000. So this legislative proposal would propose to raise our civil penalties for the enforcement division from 15 to 30 for specified violations and 5 to 8 for others, the majority. The additional minor violations and a letter of admonishment. CSLB recently got authority to issue a letter of admonishment. It's something below a citation, but above a verbal slap on the hand. And it was a great measure for us because it allowed us to not send everything to citation, which is subject to appeal, which is subject to up to $10,000 for CSLB to prosecute for what you saw above, less than $10,000 in fines to recover. So a letter of admonishment was a great tool for something below a citation for CSLB to express to the licensee concerns and possible chance to educate for minor violations of the law. The problem with the letter of admonishment, not problem as much as limitation, is that as written, it only allows for 1 violation. The enforcement division has determined that it would be useful to include other violations in a letter of admonishment to achieve that same purpose of counsel, education, and corrective action without going to citation, but make it clear that this would not be for egregious violations. Egregious violations, anything with a financial injury, would still go to disciplinary action, which is a step above a letter of admonishment. So again, this proposal would authorize CSLB to include more than 1 violation in the letter of admonishment. And then sub B, this was the big one that we discussed at our September 2020 board meeting. What it does is preclude CSLB from accepting exemption certificates from workers' compensation. So under current law, everyone knows no matter what you do in California, if you're an employer, you have employees, you have to have workers' comp. The way it works under current law for CSLB is a contractor can tell the board that they don't have any employees, and they can fill out a 1-page form that certifies or promises to the board that they don't have any employees. Well, year after year, dating forever, we've found that between 50 and 60% of licensees file this exemption. And through the enforcement division, it just doesn't play out. We've discovered through research and enforcement actions, it just doesn't play out that the majority of licensed contractors in California who promise not to have employees actually don't have employees. So what this proposal does is preclude 3 license classes from filing an exemption in the first year. If this measure is successful, those would be the C8 concrete, C20 HVAC, and D49 tree service. These 3 licenses were selected for 2 reasons. One is CSLB staff and research and enforcement efforts have determined that these are likely to have employees. But 2 is we've been able to get the associations that represent some of these industries on board with this requirement. And then the measure at the same time would preclude the registrar from accepting exemptions from everybody by 2025. The practical effect of that is that it will be a condition of licensure starting in 2025 that a licensed contractor have a certificate of insurance on file with CSLB. That is the third proposal for which CSLB will be seeking an author. That is the update, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments from the public, Rick?
No comments.
Any comments from Jim Ruane? I see your hand up.
Thank you. Mike, what is your procedure or your steps in getting sponsorship for bills?
It's a great question. So sponsorship is kind of an informal term that some authors don't like to use. There's sponsorship and there's support. If the board formally votes to support a measure, then the board votes on it, and you've given staff authority to write the authors a letter of support, write the committees in the legislature a letter of support, or write to the governor a letter of support. Support is different from sponsorship. Sponsorship is kind of an informal ownership. And traditionally, without requiring board action, when the board, when CSLB staff brings a measure to the board and the board approves it, if it comes from CSLB, traditionally CSLB tends to be the sponsor. So, for example, the three measures that are mentioned on page 223, those would all be board sponsored. Now, we've seen with authors in the past, some authors don't like the word sponsor. So we've used the word partnership before, but it's kind of an informal delegation. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, it does. I wasn't sure the procedure to get from here to there. And
sure. As far as getting an author, that is also it's an informal process that involves making calls, relying on relationships, talking to associations, hearing their recommendations, and finding somebody for which the policy that the measure advances is sort of in the ballpark of the prospective author. So it's there's kind of an art form to finding an author as well. And for these three measures on 223, we will be looking for an author here in the next few weeks. And if we are able to obtain an author and the authors are okay with it, CSLB would be the sponsor of the three measures on 223.
thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any other board members? I don't see any hands. No one's chiming in.
Yeah,
Miguel has his hand up.
thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, Michael, a question for you regarding the increase in the penalty. Is there a provision in that legislation to potentially have a reoccurring cost price index built into that, or will we have to go back 5 years down the road and visit it again?
That is an excellent question, Miguel, or Mr. Galarza, I apologize. As written, the measure would just be a one-time increase. There's no provision for an incremental increase, so the board would have to go back to request an additional increase. Now, I will note, just on a point of interest, the chair of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee attempted a measure last year that would have authorized all DCA boards and bureaus to, under their own power, increase their fees through the Consumer Price Index. And that measure stalled in the Senate Business and Professions Committee. So it was attempted, but did not succeed. But that's just an aside, an interesting fact. This measure that we're talking about here is just a one-time Consumer Price Index increase. Thank you.
Okay. Doesn't look like I have anyone else. All right, we're moving to agenda item E. We're going to be looking for a motion here. Review, discussion, and possible action on legislative proposal that would make illegal dumping a cause of discipline for licensed contractors. We're on page 233 of your packets. The legislative language in the packet is for Assembly Bill 2368, introduced in 2020 by Assembly members Quirk and Mathis. Chief, go ahead and give us an explanation on this measure.
So, Mr. Ruane, you could not have teed up this issue more perfectly with your question about sponsorship. This is a perfect example of your question. The measure on 235 is not CSLB sponsored. It was also not successful. The reason it is here is because the CSLB received a lot of technical inquiries from the author on this measure, and we provided a lot of technical support. And as a result of our efforts, the author, Assemblymember Bill Quirk, did ask if CSLB would be interested in sponsoring this measure. So this would be the first time that I'm aware of in CSLB history, and I haven't been here that long, that CSLB would be asked to be a sponsor of a measure that did not come from the board. So that's what this is here to discuss. All that's being asked of the committee today is permission to forward this request from the Assembly member's office to the full board. So that would be to forward the request to the full board that CSLB consider sponsoring this measure. But let's give you some background. You'll see on page 236 that this measure, which will be introduced again by the Assembly member in the 2021 session, they did inform us they will be introducing this. They pulled it because of COVID. And they will introduce it whether CSLB can sponsor or not. So those are important facts. But all it does is add the words illegal dumping to an existing CSLB statute that gives CSLB authority to discipline contractors for violations of law that are outside of the contractor's law. So this section of law that would be amended is the same section that gives authority for CSLB to go after a contractor for failing to pull a permit. And various other labor and safety laws. It's kind of CSLB's catch-all for different areas of law that allow CSLB to pursue a license discipline for. So what happened here is Assembly Member Quirk introduced this with this measure because of environmental and safety and health concerns. Local DAs in Alameda County, Contra Costa County, specifically LA County, have identified as a problem illegal dumping, primarily construction materials. There's certainly been, batteries, mattresses, and other concerns, but we have documented cases of licensed contractors illegally dumping construction materials in these counties. And Assembly member Bauer Cahan and the Alameda and Contra Costa County DAs actually got $750,000 in state funding to deal with this problem. But what we are told, and the reason this has come to our attention, is because these are really hard to prosecute. The reason being, it's difficult to prosecute an entity for a criminal violation, identifying the responsible actor, identifying witnesses. So we are told that these cases do not get prosecuted, and there winds up being no deterrent effect for a licensee who wants to save money by dumping construction materials. And it's apparently a problem throughout Southern and Northern California. So we were contacted by Assemblymember Quirk's office about this issue, and they said, hey, these aren't getting prosecuted. CSLB, can you go after these contractors? And we told them, if there is not a specified act or omission that violates the contractor's law that gives CSLB to suspend or revoke a license, give that authority, then we don't have authority. So if I throw some construction materials in my truck and dump them somewhere, I'm not acting in the capacity of a contractor, and nothing in the contractor's law specifically gives the registrar authority to revoke a contractor's license for that. So what this measure does is provide CSLB the authority to discipline a licensed contractor for illegally dumping construction materials. How would this work with CSLB? Well, real quick, licensed contractors only. We're not talking unlicensed contractors. 2, this would depend heavily on local jurisdictions. Very, very similar to building permit enforcement. We would have to talk to the local jurisdiction with the local ordinance, with the local law violation, and find out what happened and hinge upon the local jurisdiction's finding of the violation of illegal dumping. 3, CSLB would not be opening an illegal dumping unit or doing illegal dumping stings. This bill would not require that. This would be an addition to our existing authority. And finally, I did get a question before this meeting about this. What happens if a contractor's employee goes rogue and dumps something in an alley and the licensee had no knowledge of it? Well, we did talk to our legal counsel on this, and it's actually not very different than any other violation that we would hold an employer responsible for. If the employee was acting within the scope of their duties during work hours, getting paid by the licensee, we would hold the contractor responsible. But the key here is it would have to relate to a construction activity. We're not, if a licensee goes and dumps their nephew's science project, that's not CSLB's jurisdiction. Illegal dumping is illegal, but what this is getting at is the act has to be connected to a construction site. This would give CSLB authority to directly discipline a licensee for violating a local illegal dumping law. It will be seen as more of a deterrent than existing law currently provides. And the request today is to seek permission to go to the full board to seek board approval of a sponsorship of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions from the board? I don't see any hands. Rick, do we have any questions from the public?
No public comment.
Okay, so we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to present this measure to the full board in December and request that the full board consider the author's request for CSLB sponsor of this legislative measure. Do I have a motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Felice, please call roll. Oh, I'm sorry.
Belt-
I got to ask for public comment, Rick,
No public comment.
and back again to the board. Board comment. Okay, Felice, sorry to step on you.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Yes.
Rodney Cobos,
Yes.
Miguel Galarza,
Yes.
Susan Granzella,
Yes.
Jimmy Wayne,
Yes.
Mary Teichert.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. That brings us to agenda item F, review and discussion on board study to evaluate sufficiency of current $15,000 contractor bond amount and possible action on study recommendations. Business and Professions Code Section 7071.6E. Now we're on page 239 of your packet. Senate Bill 610 from 2019 was CSLB's most recent sunset bill. It required CSLB to conduct a study to evaluate if the current $15,000 bond amount is sufficient and whether an increase may be necessary, and submit the study to the legislature by January 1st, 2021. A draft of the study is now complete and is in your packet for review. Chief, do you want to give us a couple of ideas on what's going on here?
Sure. Yes, this relates, as the chair mentioned, this relates to CSLB's sunset bill. One of the issues that came up during sunset was whether the bond is sufficient. This research, which is in your packet, makes a few findings. Mainly the most important, I think, for our discussion is that this bond protects homeowners, residential homeowners. Even though by statute, the bond protects anybody who is harmed by a contractor, our research demonstrates that the primary protection that this bond allows is for homeowners. So the study really does find that within the last 5 or 6 years, the value of construction contracts that consumer homeowners have filed at CSLB have steadily increased over the years, from the low 5,000s, which there are still plenty of those, but the range over $15,000 and $25,000, those numbers are increasing exponentially. And the fact is, the $15,000 bond is not enough to restitute a consumer harmed on one of those contracts. So the bond was, the recommendation here is that the highest that CSLB can raise this bond really is $25,000 without requiring some kind of separate underwriting process. It's not the goal of the bond being a minimum requirement for licensure if you have to take steps that you would need to take when you're applying for a house to get the bond. So our research indicates that if CSLB were to suggest a number higher than $25,000, it might require significant underwriting that's not done currently as part of the requirement of the license bond as a prerequisite for licensure. So this study found that approximately 20% or so of the bonds pay out to the full amount, $15,000, which probably means on all of those, or the majority of those, the bond was not sufficient. And approximately 1,300 license bonds are paid out each year through CSLB records. And it's probably time to increase the bond to match modern residential construction, which in the Pacific Northwest, the study finds is around $60,000 for your average remodeling project. So that's kind of some of the findings in the study, but I can answer any specific questions about the study. And sort of the last point is the CSLB was limited by the legislature to just answer one question. Is $15,000 sufficient? We weren't asked to recommend a new amount. We weren't asked to pursue legislation, just is $15,000 sufficient? For the reasons that I've stated, the study does present a draft conclusion that $15,000 is not sufficient. That's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chief. Do I have anything from the public, Rick?
Yes, we do have one question from Alan Diaz. Alan, please go ahead and make your comment.
Yeah, my question was, is there any thought of like a sliding scale for the bonds? Like as some contractors get licensed and they're just starting off and they're getting little projects, maybe 15,000 is good for carrying their license. As they start growing, it sounds good that they would need a larger bond because they're doing bigger projects.
Thank you for that. Chief, have you looked into that?
Yes, thank you for that question. The CSLB conducted a lot of research for this study and solicited a lot of feedback from licensed contractors. And one of the themes that we discovered is on page 37 of the bond study or page 278 of your packet, which indicates that we received a lot of input about California implementing kind of a tiered bond system that prescribes different bond amounts for different license classifications. The fact is, some work that some contractors do is valued at a lot higher than work that other contractors do. Some license classes, a $15,000 bond is sufficient, whereas other classes is simply not. There's also the fact that public works contracts and certain large commercial contracts, there will be a contract bond unrelated to the license bond that will be part of the specific obligations in that contract that protect the owner. So these are all considerations that we flagged for the legislature to consider when they're looking at this issue. That's what the study does get into that. And that would require amending how the bond is currently done, but that's the purpose of studying this, is whether we need to amend it and how the bond is written. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief.
That's the only public comment.
Thank you, Rick. I don't see any board comment. So we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to present this measure to the full board in December and request that the full board consider the author's request for CSLB sponsor of this legislative. Wait a minute.
I'd make a motion.
Yeah. Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any board comment on that motion?
Can I interject?
Go ahead, Chief.
I apologize, Augie. There is a glaring typo in your script.
Yeah, I noticed that.
and you caught it. And so my apologies for that. The motion that we need here doesn't relate to a legislative measure. That is my fault. Please refer to the bottom of page 239.
Chief, do me a favor. State the motion that staff desires.
The staff recommendation is to authorize staff to make any minor and technical changes to the study, including any changes recommended by the committee, and present the draft study for consideration by the full board in December of 2020.
Does the maker of the motion accept that?
Yes.
Does the second of the motion accept that?
Yes.
Okay, so we're back on the question. Rick, is there any question on this from the public?
No comments.
Is there any question from the board? Doesn't look like it. Felice, roll call, please.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Yes.
Rodney Cobos,
Yes.
Miguel Galarza,
Yes.
Susan Granzella,
Yes.
Jim Ruane,
Yes.
Mary Teichert.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much, Felice. We now go to item G. We're now update, discussion, and possible action to amend 2019-2021 legislative strategic plan objectives. We're now on page 285 of your packets. Chief is going to update us on the legislative division strategic plan, as well as provide an update on what's changed that the committee may need to vote on. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Chair. So the Legislative Division Strategic Plan is on 285 and 286. And some of the committee members are familiar with these objectives, but we have some new committee members, so I will go through these quickly. Item 3.1, this is just a good general policy for the legislative division to have, which is collaborate with industry and consumer leaders annually, and we do it more often than annually to get the pulse of what's going on and come up with any legislative changes or legislative things that need to be discussed. We do that regularly. Item 3.2, this item was discussed as one of the 3 measures that CSLB will be seeking sponsorship for in 2021. That is legislation to mandate workers' compensation insurance for specified license classifications. So this measure will be updated if we're successful with that legislative proposal. Item 3.3, review disaster-related consumer protection laws, including the hazardous substances certification requirements. There's kind of 2 prongs here. In SB 1189, which successfully enacted our B2 residential remodeling contractor's license, we were able to talk to the author about getting some disaster-related consumer protections in there. So that's a little bit of a win for this legislative strategic plan item. But in addition, this also relates to the hazardous substances certification requirements. That goes back to a very specific statute in CSLB law. I think it's 7058.7 or one of those that goes back to the 80s that relates to underground storage tanks. It allows CSLB to issue a certification for licensees that dig into the earth and remove a material that is flagged as hazardous, but the statute is really narrow. It relates to sites, dig sites that are flagged by specified agencies for CSLB authority to even come in. This strategic plan item we'll look at that and find out whether this is still serving its job or we need to maybe expand hazardous substances certification. Take a look at these hazardous substances issues. And we are working on that. The testing division just finished a study on that, which I will be reviewing with the licensing chief soon. Item 3.4, the multiple qualifier responsibilities. Anybody who wants to dig into this heavily, the bond study discussed this issue on page 29 of the bond study. Basically, we have the license bond, which we all know about, the $15,000 license bond, but there's also a license qualifier bond. It wasn't raised up to $15,000. It probably should have been. So the bond study addresses that because it's currently at $12,500. But also there are some enforcement concerns around a licensee having or a qualifier being on multiple licenses and not being able to execute their qualifier responsibilities. So this strategic plan item takes a look at that, and we think we're going to address some of those concerns with the bond study. Item 3.5, clarify the home improvement contract requirements. There is a pretty lengthy and hefty area of law in the construction, in the contractor state license law. It is Article 10 of the Division 3, Chapter 9 of the Business Professions Code that deals with the home improvement contract requirements. And there's lots of notices and requirements for home improvement contracts and service and repair contracts that are in that section of law that are old. Some of them are old, and they could use some updating to be more clear. The notices need to be separated out so consumers and contractors know what's in front of them, and possibly the $750 limit for service and repair contracts, which allows a contractor, which takes away a 3-day right to cancel once the contractor starts work on specified projects. Possible that $750 needs to be raised. So we are looking at this extensive area of law to make it more clear, and we hope to have some bullets for what those ideas will be coming up here in this coming months. Item 3.6, we are currently looking for an author for this. So this was discussed earlier among the measures that CSLB is looking to sponsor this year. The measure to increase civil penalties. Item 3.7, this is the one item that we'll be asking the committee to vote on today. We struck the word regulatory on page 286, and we're changing it to statutory with the committee's permission. That's because regulations are a lengthy project. They take sometimes 2 years to complete, and CSLB has a number of regulatory projects that are in the works right now. And this can be done, we think, a lot quicker and more effectively and clearer for contractors in statute. So with the committee's permission, the chair might ask for a motion to change that to statutory. And then 3.8, this is addressed in the fee study. past board chair Kevin Albanese had an excellent recommendation some years back at one of our board roundtables to consider whether corporations should be charged more for renewals or fees, certain fees. They might be able to absorb it better than others, say sole owners. Well, the fee study gets into that pretty heavily. And the board, as you know, will be looking at the fee study in December. That is my update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any public comment, Rick?
No public comments.
I don't see any board comment. So we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to change the description of the strategic plan item 3.7 from regulatory to statutory. Do I have a motion?
Motion. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Back to the public, Rick. Any questions?
No questions, no comment.
And I don't see anything from the board. Please take roll.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Yes.
Rodney Cobos,
Yes.
Miguel Galarza,
Yes.
Susan Granzella,
Yes.
Jim Ruane,
Yes.
Mary Teichert.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. Well, we're on the agenda item that we've all been looking for today. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn. Not everyone at once.
So
We have a motion and a second. Without exception, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Aye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.